Now, what's not being accounted for is the legal practice that we're expecting to come together, where if people die and a company that is liable for having an impact on that product is not in compliance with the federal law, that completely changes the legal dynamic of a lawsuit against a company.
Yes, it does.
That might kill someone. So as a neutral connectivity player, our goal is to get every technology company on board. So far, we have 48 companies that have said, yes, we're in. We love the concept. And over time, our hope is to get integrations with all of them. They want to get people going to their stores on a weekly basis to get their weekly groceries. And they're really fighting for that consumer attention, right? And that's really important. However, all these retailers have all the same suppliers, right? These suppliers ship to different retailers, and one supplier might ship to 100 retailers, and one retailer might source from 100 suppliers. So we have this convoluted mixed web of dynamic trading partners that exchange goods with one another, and it changes every day. There might be a drought in one case. There might be a shortage of products. Products might go bad because of a freeze, right, or different components. And so I don't think there are really any supply chains that are as unpredictable as the food supply chains.
Welcome to Farm to Fork, the Innovators. I'm David Maloney, president of Datum FS. With over 40 years in the food supply chain, we explore the stories and strategies transforming how we produce and serve food. Our guest innovator today is Wiggs Civitillo, founder and CEO of Starfish, a technology powering traceability in the food supply chain. In this episode, we dive into how major players like IBM are shaping the food supply chain space, the role of Starfish in connecting over 200 different traceability solutions, key technological challenges facing the industry today, and the impact of the Food Safety Modernization Act Rule 204 and the risks it poses to companies across the supply chain. So buckle up, hit that subscribe button, and let's harvest progress together. This is Farm to Fork, the Innovators, where the future of the food supply chain starts with this episode. All right, Wiggs, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me, David. I am the founder and CEO of Starfish Technology, and I'm really happy to be here with you.
Thank you. And so maybe before we dive into Starfish later, maybe in a couple sentences, can you describe what Starfish is?
So Starfish is the leading network for food supply chain traceability, enabling companies to exchange data with their trading partners, regardless of the systems that they use and that their trading partners use. Our mission is to create a more transparent, efficient, and secure supply chain by bridging the gap between these disconnected systems that exist in the marketplace today. Our goal is also to ensure compliance, real-time visibility, and automated data sharing, helping businesses grow while maintaining control over their data and their supply chains.
Okay. And we're going to talk a lot about Wiggs. We're going to talk a lot about Wiggs' background because you're going to, for those of you in the food tech space, will be very, very familiar with his background and why Starfish. I mean, there seems to be a lot of traceability offerings out there right now and how Starfish kind of helps the whole community. Does that make sense? Am I saying that right, Wiggs?
It's spot on.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Okay, so before we step forward, and any personal hobbies, anything you want to lighten us with that would say, hey, Wiggs is a normal guy, right?
I'd like to think, I'm a normal guy. I eat, sleep, drink, all the good stuff. It may be no surprise that for someone that works in the food space, I'm actually, passionate about eating and cooking, and my wife and I, love cooking really creative dishes together. We just got a nice pasta maker recently, and we're just obsessed with it. We're making fresh pasta for some of our dinners. It's a lot of effort, but kind of fun to see, flour and all the ingredients going, into this dish that you cooked, right? I always feel like the effort, the sweat equity that you put into the meal makes it taste better, right? It makes a big difference.
Yeah. It's funny. I got one I'm Italian. I grew up rolling it, cutting it by hand on the table, right? With my grandmother and my mom. But I got an automatic one maybe 3-4 years ago. Got real excited about it and then put it away. Didn't use it for like 2 years and then broke it out at Christmas. And we've been using it like getting the good Italian flour, stuff like that. So good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. So I just teased just a little bit ago, um, what you did before Starfish. But I mean, the food space, maybe you can, before we even get into the company you're with before, how did you get into the food space? Like what interested you about it, right?
It was actually something that happened completely on accident, right? And it was more of a pursuit of technology that landed me in this space than anything else. For a long time, I've been in the technology space, about 13 years, building different types of technology products. And actually, early in my career, I was in the fintech space, building trading algorithms and deep data models for quant traders on Wall Street. And that was fascinating. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life, until entering the food space, and you meet other amazing people in different ways. But when I joined IBM about 7 years ago, at the time IBM had made significant investment in blockchain technology. Now, this was not the crypto kind of craze. It was really grounded in this trusted protocol, right? A way to store data in a trusted way, make sure the data is not changed, make sure that it's immutable and trusted. And they were building out different business units to use this blockchain technology. They had a container shipping initiative in partnership with Maersk. They had a fintech initiative. They had a whole variety of different blockchain-based use cases. And I was a part of the team that was able to incubate IBM Food Trust, which was one of these business units that was using this new technology in a space where we thought there was a lot of value to be had. And value to be added. So I fell into this space because I thought blockchain is really neat technology. I was excited about it. But once you're in the food space, does it ever take you by storm? I've absolutely fallen in love with it. It really brings you back to your roots. I don't think there's a single person that doesn't eat every day, and that's real impact, right? It's not something that's going away. So it will be here forever, and it's important that we keep food safe, that we make sure that there's not fraud in supply chains. There's so much that we did and have yet to do, that really created this passion in the food space that I think will last probably most, if not all, of the rest of my career.
Cool. So if you can define two terms for our audience here, you mentioned fintech earlier. Can you just define that? And then after that, also define what blockchain is, just in case somebody didn't listen to. Blockchain's been coming up quite a bit in our episodes, 2 episodes ago with open food chain. But just in case folks you didn't listen to those episodes, Wiggs probably can help us out with blockchain too.
Yeah. So fintech is financial technology. So technology serving the finance industry. It covers a broad range of different categories, but for my world specifically, I worked for a little while at the New York Stock Exchange and very focused on uh, the technology that facilitates trading. Back in the day, it used to be people running around with tickets and handwritten notes and writing everything down, and now everything happens in these highly advanced data centers and a lot of automated trading, and we were helping that happen. Now, blockchain is a technology. It is the technology and protocol that runs the ledgers or the records behind crypto and cryptographic trading, right? So people have heard of Bitcoin, you've heard of maybe Ethereum, maybe different types of coins or these coins that are digitized, allowing for people to exchange money, to trade, to invest, creating this new world of digital assets that's developed quite a bit in the past 10 years. But on the back end, there's this technology called blockchain that is a protocol that determines how data should be handled. Now, this is very important because if you have a system where trust is not inherent, right? The parties are not trusted. You need to make sure that data is treated securely and in a trusted manner. In the food case, right, with IBM Food Trust, the reason we use blockchain technology was you have hundreds of retailers that all do business in the United States and around the world, and they all compete with one another. Technically, if I go to one retailer and they don't have the product I'm looking for, I'm going to go to one of their competitors, right? And so they're all fighting for a share of our interests. They want to get people going to their stores on a weekly basis to get their weekly groceries, and they're really fighting for that consumer attention, right? And that's really important. However, all these retailers have all the same suppliers, right? These suppliers ship to different retailers, and one supplier might ship to 100 retailers, and one retailer might source from 100 suppliers. So we have this convoluted mixed web of dynamic trading partners that exchange goods with one another. And it changes every day. There might be a drought in one case. There might be a shortage of products. Products might go bad because of a freeze, right, or different components. And so I don't think there are really any supply chains that are as unpredictable as the food supply chains. But as a result, you have these competitors that want to collaborate, right? They all need the same data. They all need the same system. So if you can provide a ledger that allows competitors to collaborate in a trusted way, then that was the entire foundation of IBM Food Trust.
While and a ledger being essentially a database. Is that fair?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And while protecting the ideas, be able to collaborate with that database while protecting any proprietary information, etc. Right?
Exactly. The example would be if I'm a supplier and I ship to 100 retailers, those retailers should only ever see data on the products that they actually receive, the individual units of product they receive. Because if, let's say, Walmart and Albertsons both saw what I shipped to the other, they might think, well, maybe I can tell this supplier they can only ship to me, because that might put them out of competitive business, right, and vice versa. So that trusted data sharing protects each company's intellectual property, protects how they handle their supply chain operations, and that's really key to preventing anti-competitive behavior.
Cool. Thank you. All right. And so IBM Food Trust. So in my space, or back when IBM Food Trust kind of became known to me, I was in the supply chain technology data space. Right. Still I am, but not as direct as I am today. Right. And blockchain was starting to make a little bit of noise. I think IPC Subway had done a pilot, or was announced a pilot with a company called Food Logic, which is now part of Trustwell. Thinking this is about 2018 or so. And then lo and behold, here comes IBM, who really hadn't played in the food space a whole lot, right? At least in any great capacity where it got our attention. And, quite honestly, it scared us pretty good, right? I mean, here's IBM. I mean, why did IBM get into this food blockchain? What was it? Did clients bring them there, or?
At the start, there was so much excitement around the potential of this technology, right? And it was throughout the industry, this can make things more efficient for everyone. It can really make a change. In my view, and this is kind of my own opinion, but I have a deep respect for IBM being a company that is always focused on trying to combine, both profitable operations with doing good for the world, right? And I think it's a company that really gets excited about projects that can drive positive impact. They've got a really robust sustainability initiative. They acquired the weather company, and we're driving insights and environmental intelligence to help with deforestation efforts and above ground biomass. Again, and not sorry to use all the big industry terms, but they've done these projects that have done incredible things for the world, and this felt right in their wheelhouse of something that could really drive an amazing impact. It was also interesting to see a neutral party like IBM that's really good at technology that can help support food businesses that are really good at what they do, what they specialize in. So it seemed to be a good fit to have this neutral-ish party coming in and helping that's really good on the technology front.
Okay, good. And then what is IBM Food Trust then, just for our listeners?
Yeah, so Food Trust is a platform that takes in data from every party in the supply chain and maps it together in a trusted way. So we collect data from farms, from grower, packers, shippers, right? You've got manufacturers, you've got distributors, you've got retailers, restaurants, food service companies. Now they all have different intermingled relationships through the supply chain. But this platform, using blockchain technology, using a trusted ledger, collected all that data and mapped it together so that only the right people could see the right data. And if there was let's say, a foodborne illness outbreak, right, and someone was running an investigation, what used to take, let's say, 3 to 6 weeks to identify where the bad products were, where they came from, and where they went, could now be reduced to just 2.2 seconds to run a full trace all the way back to origin and all the way back to where it ended up in stores.
That's great. And still today, though, the FDA will say the average food recall takes about 57 days, right? And so for You can kind of, I say, like, technology can take food recalls from months to minutes, but you're basically saying, hey, no, it can take from months to seconds. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Now, it's a qualified statement, and it's important to acknowledge you can process data very quickly today. Technology is amazing, but
Right.
you have to still collect the data, right? It's not something that just happens automatically, and there's a lot of nuance to how data is collected, how data is structured, and certainly we can get into that a little bit if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. So, what were the success story? What was the success story at IBM Food Trust for you? Would you say?
Yeah, yeah. We took a concept and built it into the largest blockchain-based traceability network in the world, and that's something that I am very proud of and will always be proud of. Now, traceability historically, 2018 through let's say 2022, was always a nice to have. So it was not easy to convince companies to take all the effort to collect this data just for something that was, just nice to have. Now, there were all sorts of different benefits that we could facilitate. So we've talked a little bit about food safety. We also could reduce food fraud. We could improve the resilience of your supply chain and make your supply chains more efficient. We were driving sustainability initiatives, and it was still the nascent phases of sustainability, right? Even getting to a granular carbon footprint of an individual product was possible using technology, but the data didn't really exist to
Hmm.
facilitate that use case. But also ethical sourcing, making sure that there was no slave labor, forced labor, or child labor. And the most fun ROI use case was on the consumer engagement story, a consumer engagement front, where even before COVID, we had these QR codes on products where if you scan the QR code, you got the story of where your specific product came from, not just some generic marketing story. It was completely different. It was these are where the beans in your cup of coffee actually came from. And if you'd like, you can go donate to the farmer that actually produced that coffee because people that know the coffee supply chain know that farmers are not getting a lot of the margin of the actual products that they grow. So you can actually help with a clean water initiative or a schooling initiative. And those kind of projects were really, really neat. So I'm proud of building a business in the absence of any kind of mandate, right? Any kind of true requirement. Now, in 2022, the FDA finalized a federal law, and it was kicked off in 2023 that gave food companies 3 years to become compliant. The law was called is called the Food Safety Modernization Act. And specifically, the traceability rule, or Rule 204, requires that food companies trace any one of 18 categories of high risk products. So that means anything from the typical fruits and vegetables that you see in many recalls and outbreak investigations to anything that includes allergens like nut butters or even shell eggs, or even most of the seafood categories and other types of high risk products. So the industry is changing more rapidly than we've ever seen. And over the past 7 years, we saw a lot of success bringing value and benefits to these businesses. But now they're being forced by a federal mandate by the FDA to do this. And it opens up whole new sets of possibilities for companies to realize these benefits as well.
Cool, cool. And we'll talk more about the Food Safety Modernization Act, Rule 204. Maybe we'll just so, in the essence of time, we'll refer to it as FSMA 204 from now on. But that's what we're talking about, folks. And thanks for defining that for everybody, Wiggs. So, what was your biggest challenge when you were at IBM? I mean, you mentioned traceability is a nice to have, right? And I think that I mentioned in prior episodes that traceability doesn't sell, right? It's there's got to be some other mechanism, some other drive there, right? And maybe that's it. But what was perhaps for you the biggest challenge?
Yeah, outside of it being a nice to have, we had a lot of challenges getting all the way through the supply chain, right? A company like IBM is, as one of the largest corporations in the world, very, very good at serving the largest corporations in the world, right? So we had great
Mhm.
partnerships with folks like Walmart, like Carrefour, like Nestle, like these big, big brands that knew that IBM was a trusted brand that would help support their needs. But for traceability, you need to get every item that flows through the supply chain all the way back to the origin. And that means thousands or hundreds of thousands of different food companies need to be submitting and sharing their data through your network. So we were not exceptionally well positioned to go to these farms and help them understand what data they needed to collect. We used the GS1 protocol, right, which is the standard language of traceability, and explaining what a commissioning event is, what a shipping, aggregation, a disaggregation event, and all the key data elements associated with these supply chain events was very difficult for a farming operation or even anyone that's in the supply chain who is dealing with a lean team that is focused on their primary goal of getting food in a healthy way or in a safe way to consumers as quickly as possible. So that was a real challenge of ours, and I think we saw a lot of difficulty getting adoption and driving adoption with smaller businesses that, folks like Walmart needed their data, but we had a hard time collecting that data.
Yeah. Do you think the relatively low margins throughout the food supply chain contribute to this?
Absolutely. Yeah. In addition to having lean teams, especially with food safety teams that are already stretched very thin, adding something like traceability requires new people to be hired. It requires new programs. It requires expenses for new technology platforms that help with this, and they can help, but the margins are already so thin that these companies can't really take even another penny out of their margins, because the produce itself is selling for such a small price tag. And again, there are recalls that hit margins, and it's really a volume game. So that was difficult, and we did learn the hard way. Again, going back to blockchain, that in this industry, using blockchain technology is replicating the data multiple times over. It's a part of how the data is made secure is by replicating this data, and that increases your cost. So we ended up finding out that we were a very expensive solution for an industry that, in many cases, couldn't afford what we were providing or the service that we were providing.
Interesting. Okay. So from there, you uh, you started Starfish, right? So why? Like, why not stay at IBM Food Trust, right? And how is Starfish different?
I learned many lessons with my time with IBM Food Trust, and by the time I left IBM, I was actually had the opportunity to have responsibility for a few different supply chain products within IBM's portfolio. So we had procurement, fulfillment, environmental intelligence, sustainability, and even inventory optimization. All these different products that many people don't know IBM has a very robust supply chain software business, but many of these products taught me lessons about what food companies and supply chain companies needed out of a solution. And in the food industry specifically, IBM Food Trust was one of many players, right? There were actually over 200 different players that all had different capabilities around product traceability. These were some retrofitted ERP systems. Sometimes it was EDI systems. And forgive all the acronyms. I'm happy to go through and define each one. But any type of data management or process management systems that exist in the supply chain have an opportunity to collect this traceability data. So as one of many players, I began to realize that it wasn't a very scalable model to try and address all of the companies in the supply chain, right? There are companies that provide traceability for seafood companies, and they do it really well. The seafood supply chain is completely different than the cheese supply chain or the nut butter supply chain, and or even the produce or leafy grain supply chains. These are completely different processes that require different expertise, different platforms, and even regionally, you see some folks have specialization in certain regions. So if you have someone in Latin America, in South America, in Africa, right? There are a lot of cultural differences and language differences that you want someone boots on the ground to be there helping out, collecting the data necessary. So that data collection is actually best suited for people to specialize in these different areas. Starfish came from the realization that it's not always appropriate to go into these companies and request or require that they only use our platform, right? It is a more open-minded approach to saying, use the systems that you use, but we'll make sure that all those systems are connected together. Now that shift in mindset, again, was something that we did that made us compatible with all of the players in the industry. In fact, IBM was very supportive of us going off and doing this because we were providing a complementary service to IBM Food Trust. We weren't competing with their business. And it's actually very important for our business model that we're considered neutral by all of these technology companies, right? We're serving technology companies and indirectly serving food companies, but I'm not going after food companies, right? We're doing this intermediary approach where we're embedded and we're supporting these technology companies to better serve their clients, who are the food companies throughout the world.
And so it's kind of interesting, right? If you think of one of the challenges with traceability is you have these competitors in the food supply chain space that may be a little anxious about sharing their data in some sort of platform. But then what's evolved is you now have these traceability competitors that may not be able to do everything for somebody like Walmart or McDonald's or something like that, and maybe a little nervous about sharing what they're doing with one of their other, right, other traceability platforms. And then, oh, by the way, then you've got somebody, a big company that may have to use 3, 4 different traceability platforms just to handle all of their products, right? Which really isn't functional.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The very thing that makes these technology solutions competitively differentiated is also holding them back in the market because they're not sharing this data. They're operating in silos in some cases.
Yeah.
And the idea of building all of these point-to-point connections is a big lift, right? That's a lot of connectors, a lot of data translation, a lot of processing that needs to happen.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there's roughly 200 companies out there that are in the food traceability space. How many can Starfish work with?
We are designed to work with all of them, and our mission is to work and connect all of them together. So, as a neutral connectivity player, our goal is to get every technology company on board. So far, we have 48 companies that have said, "Yes, we're in. We love the concept." And over time, our hope is to get integrations with all of them, so that by serving these 200 companies, those companies are able to serve the million plus businesses that are affected by this Food Safety Modernization Act, and eventually food companies throughout the world that require traceability. And we can have all of them connected to all of their trading partners.
And do they have to provide traceability, or do they just have to have the data?
So the federal law requires that companies collect data on the events of every product as it flows through the supply chain. They have to store that data for 2 years and provide reports to the FDA when the FDA comes calling. So each of these companies has 24 hours to provide an electronic sortable spreadsheet to the FDA. Now, the FDA also requires that these companies share certain events with their trading partners. And this is the key that makes things so difficult. If you're mapping together a traceability supply chain and you have someone, harvesting a product and shipping some of that product to a downstream party, they, chop the product up and send it to 10 different parties. And you have this kind of weaving path down the supply chain. In order to link everything together, you do need to know when products are shipped and who they're shipped to. Now, those shipping events have a source and they have a destination. And so destination can determine where the data flows. And that's effectively how our system works, right? We determine in a very sophisticated way a simple answer to the right person seeing the right data and becoming compliant with federal law. Because these tech solutions are operating in isolation in some cases, they're not actually sharing data with all of the necessary trading partners, which is holding their customers back from federal compliance.
Yeah. So you mentioned several times federal compliance and Food Safety Modernization Act, Rule 204. I'd kind of like to step into that in a few minutes, right? Because the hope is for somebody like myself that sees well, let me ask you this question. Is the technology in the food supply chain, if you had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, from immaturity being 1, maturity being 10, how would you rate it today?
It's an interesting answer. I think the technology is fantastic, but
Mhm.
adoption in many cases in the food space is lagging.
Great point.
So I in two different rankings, and I give it a higher ranking for the technology itself. We even have IoT sensors. We got RFID chips, and adoption is not as simple as just turning it on. It's expensive to adopt this stuff. So I think over time we'll see more adoption.
Yeah. And again, low margins in the business, right? Low margins. I can speak to food service at least. Low margins, particularly the model, the franchisor franchisee model is a challenge, at least what I saw, because the franchisors are less likely to invest in their stores and their operations. if there's a franchisee there as opposed to they own that store. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. So we're going to talk about FSMA 204 and compliance in a second, but there are other benefits that you mentioned earlier, right? And particularly what caught my ear was you talk about the efficiency. Can you walk us through the efficiency that happens if everybody in the food supply chain can collaborate? Because, folks, let me tell you something. I mean, I've been in this business for almost 40 years. The way it was done for pretty much the first 30 years of my life is everybody beat each other up, right? What's the cheapest you can get, right? It's relationship driven, but they beat each other up. But those margins have become so compressed that now, and the leverage has shifted in that chain some. There's not enough food manufacturing to keep up. There's not enough distribution. And gee, I wonder why, because their margins were so low, right? That what I've seen over the last at least decade from the food service industry, I can speak to, and at some point grocery, is they have been more open to exploring collaborative practices within their supply chain. And I think it's because they've squeezed that lemon as tight as much as they could, right? So how does that collaboration help the food supply chain, not from a cost, but also perhaps from a quality standpoint?
Yeah, there are so many examples of ways that supply chains can become more efficient, and collaboration helps with building out resilient supply chains. When you look at downstream players like major retailers or food service companies, their key consideration is making sure that they have a resilient supply of products. Now, traceability provides interesting visibility into where your products actually come from. Most companies only have tier one visibility into who their initial suppliers are, but in many cases, there are tier two, three, four, five, many different tiers of suppliers. And in one case in particular, we actually had a supply chain mapping exercise where we were trying to identify what the concentration of suppliers was for a certain retailer. And they sourced from maybe, I think it was 6 different farms. And when we actually had traceability of the data, we learned that some farms sold products to one another to help fulfill their contracts. Some farms sell to brokers who sell back to farms, right? And there are roles for every participant in the supply chain. But when we ran this analysis, in certain cases where they thought they had 6 independent, diversified sources of produce, it ended up being just 2 farms that were providing all of their products. So if one of those farms went out of business, they'd actually be in really difficult shape. And if they're out of product, then their competitors have product that will source or draw their consumers. Now, the other one that's a fun example, which I think is really fascinating, is just the simple analysis of shelf life management, right? So the shelf life of a product from the time it's harvested, you have a certain amount of time before it needs to get to shelves and be sold and then consumed either at restaurants or at home by consumers. Now, there are different factors of that degradation curve, right? How quickly a product degrades. And we're talking about live living organisms, right? It's their nature to decay, right? And so if you have, let's say, a tomato and it's being stored in a hot container for 5 days, then you might know it's going to go bad a little sooner, right? Certainly that's the case for meat products, or in some cases you might even identify products that have been treated unintentionally or intentionally so poorly that you should just dispose of them. Why waste all the transportation getting a product to stores that would never sell? In some cases, you can track cold chain data complementary to traceability data, and that shows what the degradation curve is. In other cases, you can just make something as simple as understanding the harvest date for a certain product, verified at the source, and understanding when you get to share a store, changing from a first in, first out mentality to a first expired, first out mentality can make a huge difference in maximizing the saleability of your products, right? You might receive products that are going to expire before the product's on shelves. And if you can swap them out, you can get the right products to the right consumers at the right time.
Yeah. So here's a shocker. First in, first out doesn't work for everything, folks. And just think about wine, for example, right? There's very good wine that needs to age, right? And, there's a lot of steakhouses that like to age their beef, right? So very interesting. Okay. So You mentioned that you work with the traceability technology companies, but what if I'm a grocery chain, a major grocery chain, or a food service operation, and I've got kind of nodes of data through different technologies? Can you help them too, or do you usually refer that?
It's a bit of a mix because
Yeah.
that disparate systems isn't just the technology solutions in the market. It isn't just different companies using different systems within companies themselves that have gone through any acquisitions. In so many cases, we found that their internal systems aren't communicating with one another, right? In many
Okay.
cases, you've got companies with, in one case, up to 30 different internal ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems, that are handling their flows of products, their accounting, getting them paid or issuing payments. I mean, these systems are very difficult to reconcile. Now, our team is specialized in reconciling data. It's a key part of the value that we bring to the industry. And this is something that nobody wants to do. It's not the sexy work of getting products or selling products or actually feeding people. This is kind of the grunt work of difficult data normalization or data translation that is necessary to actually make use of the data. Data itself in isolation is not really doing anything, right? We're trying to generate insights, try and generate value. So in some cases, we do help with that. Our model is to serve the technology companies that are serving these food businesses. So
Yeah.
sometimes, we prefer to go indirect and support our partners more than ever.
Okay, great. And so FSMA 204, again, Food Safety Modernization Act 204. I think there's a hope that this could be the shove or the impetus to help adoption, if you will. And that's a great point, right? There's a lot of great tech offerings out there, but the adoption is tough. It's tough. Um, and it's tough in any business, right? Tech adoption's tough in any business. Um, there's a hope that FSMA 204 will force the industry to adopt. Why do you think FSMA 204 is so important, and it will be the shove that the industry needs?
This goes back a little bit to the question you asked earlier about technology and the strength of technology. The FDA, and I've had a good relationship with the FDA for a long time, and really admire the work that they're doing. They are keeping American consumers safe across a very complex and a difficult ecosystem. They have incredible technology, and the partnership with the CDC and the FDA. If there's an outbreak investigation, they have the technology to identify 10 people that got sick, that are severely ill. They'll take a sample, they'll identify the common strain of what the common ailment is. They'll send that strain to the FDA. They'll identify what food product it came from and identify what the lot was that food product came from. That process is incredible, right? The fact that we can identify from someone who ate a product, how they got sick, where the product came from, that's really incredible technology. But when we get to the point where we're trying to identify the lot, the FDA simply doesn't have the data nor the tools to efficiently identify where those bad products came from. So in some cases, you could imagine, it's the old school pins and yarn approach of mapping different points on a map and trying to map a point of convergence where 10 people had a salad with a steak from this restaurant, and 10 people had burgers with steak, or let's say tomatoes on the salad and tomatoes on this salad, and tomatoes were the shared ingredient, right? Those fresh cut tomatoes. And uh, that's a very difficult process that takes time. All of the additional time that it takes are people that are at risk. It puts people at risk of consuming more of the bad product. So traceability is a proactive approach to collecting this data that facilitates a fast response as a reactive approach to outbreaks when they happen, and they do happen. So if the FDA has this information, they can be faster about removing products from shelves and keeping consumers safe and preventing any unnecessary illness. So that's really the impact. And this push that they're giving to the industry is also paramount, right? This is an expensive thing, and no companies that are responsible to shareholders are going to invest in something that isn't really focused on the bottom line. Now, safe food is very important. It can do a lot of reputational damage. And if you think about the Boar's Head meat incident that happened last year, where many people got sick and died tragically from this meat that went bad that they ate is really a devastating thing for that brand, a 100-year-old company that really could and is facing a lot of difficulty because of that outbreak. But at the same time, you need a federal mandate to drive this adoption, and that's exactly what the federal law is designed to do.
Do you think the penalties are stiff enough? I mean, there is not necessarily a penalty, right, with FSMA 204.
Well, technically, it does include civil and criminal penalties. So the
There you
FDA,
go.
as a
Yeah, there you
federal
go.
institution, can put people in prison, right? And if you're the C-suite, CEO or C-suite executive of a company that just
Okay.
killed someone because of an outbreak, you might be liable to go to prison. Now, the FDA's intent is not to put people in jail. It's to incentivize people to act in the right way to keep people safe, right? And that's their primary motivation. So the FDA has said in the first year, very similar to the SEC kind of regulations in the financial space, they're not going to put people in prison in the first year. Or they're going to try to avoid it. They're just going to try and coach people through so that as long as they're trying to do the right thing, if not, might not be perfect, but as long as they're trying, they'll help them to get to the right destination, right? Then you might not have as powerful of an effect on the industry. Now, what's not being accounted for is the legal practice that we're expecting to come together, where if people die and a company that is liable for having an impact on that product is not in compliance with the federal law, that completely changes the legal dynamic of a lawsuit against a company that might kill someone. So that's really the scariest part of what this could mean for food companies is they have a new liability from a legal perspective that didn't exist before.
It could be a brand. I mean, they already have a legal liability, but if they are ignoring federal law around that, the thought process is that the civil penalties could be significantly more. Is that fair?
Exactly.
And then, oh, by the way, the public relation risk could be significantly more, and the brand exposure could be significantly more. And, look, folks, all you have to do is kind of think about Chipotle, which is a wonderful company, right? 10, 12 years ago and the challenges they had. And for what it's worth, my opinion, it's not due to negligence. It would be due in part to their mission being local sourced, and they had so many different suppliers. It's so hard to manage, right? But it took a long time for Chipotle's stock to recover, right? It really did. Now, Chipotle does well now, and everybody would say, well, they're a great company, and yes, they are, right? But think of the brands out there that don't have the brand power that Chipotle has and the risk that they could have because of this. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up because the civil part, I think, may come first. And it could be a lot worse, right, for the industry. Cool. So if I'm a technology company, if I'm in this space, how does someone get in touch with you, Wiggs?
Reach out. We're accepting of all inquiries. We really are designed and want to partner with anyone that's willing to work with us, and we're very easy to work with. Right, we actually have a very, very low barrier to adoption. Right, our connectors, our APIs are very easy to work with, and we, in most cases, will take on the burden of building a connector to your system. Right, so if you want to connect to us, then please reach out and work with us because we are accepting of all calls and are trying to build a network that helps everyone involved, right? And I think there really is a win-win for everyone that joins our network and uses this technology to support your businesses.
And your website is?
www.starfish-network.com.
Okay.
And you can reach out to info@starfish-network.com as well.
Yeah, and Wiggs is responsive because I cold called him on LinkedIn about doing a podcast episode, and he replied pretty quickly, folks. So good. Well, hey, Wiggs, congratulations on the business, and I'd like to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
And that brings us to the end of another insightful journey through the fields of innovation on Farm to Fork, the Innovators. It's an honor to have you listen. If you found today's episode as fascinating as we did, don't forget to share it with a friend, write a review, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Farm to Fork is not just a podcast. It's a community of forward thinkers and change makers. Your thoughts and ideas matter to us. Reach out on social media or through our website, datumfs.com, and be a part of the ongoing conversation. As we wrap up today, remember, the future of the food supply chain is in our hands. Stay curious, stay innovative, and let's continue growing together. Until next time, this is David Maloney signing off from Farm to Fork, the Innovators. Thank you for being a part of this community. See you in the next episode.